This is a Rogue Media Network podcast.
Mariette's on the move.
What?
Mariette's on the move.
Again?
Mariette's on the move.
If you're dreaming about moving to a new city to pursue the life of your dreams, this podcast is for you. Moving 18 times in 23 years to 5 of America's top cities, I know it's not easy to make those decisions alone. I help you develop the dream, the plan, and the move, even if we need to get scrappy to get you there. I'll be doing interviews, career and city spotlights, and sharing my crazy moving stories, tips, tricks, and scams to avoid. Traveling to explore your dreams has never been easier. Now let's get moving. Welcome back to the show, everyone. I am super excited for today's guest. I have Dr. Anna Kallschmidt, who is a country bumpkin, an award-winning industrial organizational psychologist, and the thought leader behind the unwritten rules of work. Her research has been implemented at global organizations, including Big Four firms and Ivy League institutions. Dr. K fearlessly confronts societal fears and cultural taboos head-on. Rather than tiptoeing around discomfort, she brazenly shares insightful yet humorous stories of her cultural snafus, catalyzing courageous conversations that empower her audience to be agents of their cultural changes with accountability instead of shame. Her mission is to pave the way for individuals to embrace vulnerability and harness the power of authenticity in every aspect of their professional journey. Her work enables organizations to take their development to the next level in a way that boosts organizational performance. She's been supporting organizations and having powerful conversations about equity and the unwritten components of workplace culture for more than 8 years. And folks, she's a PhD who talks about overcoming fears and transitions. Can you see why I wanted her on the show? Dr. Anna Kallschmidt, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Oh my gosh, I feel like I need to hit record prior to actually hitting record because we have such good conversations and today was no different. So I want to talk about a lot of different things with you, but first of all, I want to talk about common fears because I hear a lot about this. I've had them in my transitions, right? I've moved 18 times in the last 24 years to 5 different big cities, but what have you seen fear-wise that has come up for even successful people that, that they're navigating these days?
Yeah, so I have moved 10 times in the past 12 years, also to 5 different cities. Not all of them were big, but a few: Miami, San Francisco, DC.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of fears. There's about many things. And there's all, the financial, the logistical, is this going to work out? Am I going to make friends? But there's also, and what my story and my experience has been drastic changes in cultures, ideologies, etc. So I'm from a very rural part of North Florida, very different culture than even Miami, that's in the same state, and certainly different than the academic institutions or the organizations that I've worked with, around the world and around the US. And now, it's really interesting. In America, we have this kind of, I think, it's banter, a lot of it. It's fun. Well, my state's better than your state, right? And, or my region or whatever. And it's mostly fun and games, but sometimes it can be a legit fear or other people can try to scare you when you're not scared.
Yeah.
Right. So,
is that
for
more
example,
projecting their fears on you about you
I
moving?
think so. But if you don't know what's important to you and you don't know what your priorities are, then that can scare you. Right.
Yeah.
So I remember, so I'm originally from Florida, but I was in the DC area and I got an offer at Stanford, and it was right in my research interests. I was not looking for a job. It just fell into my lap. I was very happy in DC, but it was this is how
can you turn Stanford down?
Right?
Right.
And it was in my interest too. And I was oh, okay. So I was thinking about, and I was talking to one of my brother's partners, and she's not in the family anymore, but she'd been in the family a while. And I was yeah, I was home for Christmas in Florida. And I was yeah, I think I'm thinking about going to California, because she was all about DC. She was like, oh, don't go to California. They're crazy there. And it was like, you don't even know
What I'm
what
doing,
opportunity I have, or
yeah,
what part of
yeah,
California. Really, everybody in California is crazy. Our most
right,
populous state, at least at that
yeah.
time, everybody's crazy. Now, maybe she was right, because then I moved and the pandemic hit, so it wasn't a great time to
Things did go a little
move,
crazy.
right?
Yeah.
But that was kind of an extenuating factor. But um, I think those can be a lot of the fears, and that can be fears that we have even when we're not moving. That's part of what I do in the workplace is, what do we think about a group versus just talking to them? We like to
Yeah.
assume we know what everybody else thinks. And I have driven it down to, I think, 4 main fears.
Okay.
I call it the cycle of fear: the fear of change, the fear of being wrong, the fear of being replaced, and the fear of shame. And I say that the cycle of fear is within the cycle of courage. To have courage, you have to have fear. Otherwise, it's
Yeah.
not courageous. And there's a point on the cycle of courage for each of those as well.
Ooh, can we talk about that a little?
Yeah. So at least for me, those all built on each other. I had to work on one to get to the other, but they can coincide. They can be in different orders, but in my opinion, in my experience, for the fear of change, you have to have the courage to have faith. And that's not necessarily religious. If you have that, that's awesome. But faith, by definition, is believing something's going to happen, believing something good is coming, even if you don't know yet, even if there's not the evidence. A lot entrepreneurs have to have faith, right?
Tons of it.
And if you're moving across the country, you got to have faith.
Yes.
And for the fear of being wrong, you have to have the courage to be curious. It takes a lot of courage to say, maybe I don't know everything. And that's funny, because none of us know everything. I have a PhD. I don't know everything.
Even the Google doesn't know everything.
No, you even got to fact check Google, right?
Right.
For the fear of being replaced, I think we have to have the courage to recognize our own power, what is within our control, what we still bring to the table. We don't have to worry about taking it from somebody else.
Yeah.
And for the fear of shame, I think we have to have the courage to be held accountable, which is different than shame.
Yeah, I think the fear of being replaced, especially in the workplace right now, there are so many layoffs that are happening. I mean, I work in technology full time, and it's not uncommon to hear an entire department get wiped out, or sales reps, all these people. And it's such a shameful thing when it happens to you. It happened to me. I worked for a startup. We got bought out. Even the week before, I had asked my manager, because we just kind of heard rumblings. There was one, layoff, and they were like, oh, duplicate positions. And then there was a second layoff. Oh, and then they always had an excuse. And then I said, well, we're the enterprise team and we're bringing in deals. Does that mean that we are going to get let go soon? And they were like, no, absolutely not. And the very next week, we all got let go. And I remember it being so shameful. But at the same time, I was like, okay, within a week or two, I had like 5 interviews set up. So the data told me that, I am worthy and I am, a good candidate for another job. But in that moment, it was like, what did I do? I took it so personally, when really it was probably somebody in an office saying like, okay, these guys are the most expensive, let them go, and
Right.
it's a natural part of being in the workplace. So I don't know why it's so shameful.
And I think, I know you've internationally traveled. American work culture is known, right? That like we're the business,
Yeah.
And I think so much of our identity is tied to our work. Like even when I quit my job and went into just doing entrepreneurship, even then I felt shame. And I'm the one who left, right? Because I was like, well, because you got, it's not immediately, you still got to do business development. You still have to do things like that. And I was like, I feel like I'm not worth something because I didn't make money today. And I know that's wild.
Yeah.
And how dehumanizing that is.
It's just irrational.
You can be embarrassing to tell people when, even if it's a good situation, or even if it's something like you have that's completely out of your control and you have other offers. That's part of our culture. And like I'm a culture expert, but it's in our culture that business is everything. So without that, I think we can forget who we are, and forgetting who we are ironically makes us less creative, less innovative, and it sure impacts our moves and how we interact with people and the hobbies we enjoy.
Yeah, because even when somebody introduces themselves, a lot of times they're like, "Hi, my name is Mariette. I'm a sales leader," and da da da. Like it's what you do, not who you are. I don't say like, I'm
Yeah.
genuinely curious. I'm a joyful mover. Like if I said those things,
Right.
people would be like, what a weirdo.
Right.
But it would spark more conversation probably. So
I probably should. I mean, I just said that, and I don't say, hi, I'm Anna, I'm a transitioner. I usually say, hi, I'm
Right.
an industrial organizational psychologist. And
Right.
nobody even knows who that is, right?
Right, right. Well,
Yeah.
there's a woman, her name is, oh gosh, I have her book too. Holly, I just call her Holly, but Holly Murchison. Murchison. So if you're watching on YouTube, I'm looking at my bookshelf right here. But she has a book called Tell Me About Yourself. And she lives in Raleigh, North Carolina with her partner. They like she wrote this book, and it was so funny because I reached out to her on I think it was like Instagram or something, and her and I got to talking, and we talked like physically, and she helped me kind of create this 30-second elevator pitch about myself, and it goes out the window every time I have a conversation about
I know.
like something, if it's work related, so I need to
Yes.
go back to that. I need to like put her back get her on the show. But I mean, that's the thing is that you're right. Like we do wrap our identity in it. And I think even when you're moving to a different state or something, like your experience, like, okay, they're crazy. So then you're like, wait, does that make me crazy for going and trying to explore when really we have an awesome, awesome country that we live in, and we're free to go wherever we want,
Yes. And so what I, give my keynotes about, what I love writing about, training about is, I tell people it's not sports. We have like ingrained in us that there are only two options. And that if you make any decision that might be out of your normal comfort zone, out of your team, then that means you're on the other team, and somebody's got to win and somebody's got to lose.
Yeah.
And that, I think that's human nature. I think that's rooted in threat, no threat. Right? That
like
part,
caveman days.
Yes. That like instinct of, is this a threat or not? And while there are absolutely situations that are threatening, not denying violence.
Right.
In most conversations at work or most interactions with people, there are way more than two options. That's actually bad business to only see two options. And America's huge.
Yeah.
And we're a global workforce. The world is big. There are far more than two options. There are far more than two types of people. Yeah. And that can be overwhelming. That can spark more fear too. That can say, I don't want to have to think about that. That's too much. But in my experience, forcing myself to break out of that was both a grief and one that I've been so much happier since, and has opened so many more doors and opportunities that I never would have thought I had.
Yeah.
But it's always there. It's always like that underlying, oh no. And then you got to remind yourself, okay, look, like I am in a country of millions of people. Yeah. There's not only two options.
Boom. Play it.
Have you ever listened to a commercial on the radio or a podcast and thought, I could totally do that? Well, I am challenging you today. Being a voiceover artist is an amazing side hustle that can be done from the comforts of your own home. Heck, it can be an amazing career. Just ask Jesse Carroll. Jesse's got over 1,000 voiceover credits to his name. Ever watch Backroad Truckers? He's the narrator. He's also done a ton of commercials for brands you would definitely recognize. If you're ready to try your hand at voiceovers, go to mariette'sonthemove.com and head to my favorites page to learn more about his new digital course and coaching package. If you use code MOTM, you'll get 20% off at checkout. Have you heard of Monat or Modern Nature? I hadn't either before my friend Monica was raving about their skincare products that she's obsessed with. I took their hair quiz to find out which product line would be best for me since I just happen to be looking for new shampoo and conditioner, and I signed up for their VIP package that got me a little bit of everything to try out. Turns out they are the first anti-aging hair care line in the world, which I didn't even know was a thing, and their products are gluten-free, vegan, and Leaping Bunny certified, which means they're never tested on animals. Now I'm obsessed with their rich formulations that feature botanical extracts, essential oils, and other naturally based ingredients, and I want to share those products with you. I'll put the link in the show notes, or you can hit the faves page on my website. It's safe, EU approved, and clinically tested by third parties, so essentially, robustness approved. Now back to the show. Yeah, every time someone tells me they feel stuck, I'm like, you're only stuck if you stop. And what are your other options? Like, what do you love about the place that you're in? What could you be doing more of that brings you
Yeah.
joy that doesn't have to do with the state you're in or the city you're in or any of that stuff?
Hmm.
I often coach around if somebody is going back and forth between, because sometimes too many options is hard as well. Like when you have
Yes.
too many decisions to make, like,
Analysis paralysis.
yeah, it's like the
Yes.
Cheesecake Factory menu thing, right? Like you get in there and you're like
Hmm.
17 pages. Like, one, how are all the ingredients fresh? And two, like I want one of everything, you know?
Right.
So that's hard. But I often tell people, like, in technology and where I came up with City POC, which is a proof of concept, it's staying in a city for longer than a week, so you really get a feel for like what that city's about, the vibe. You talk to locals, you go to the grocery store, or that all that stuff. But sometimes I'll tell people, like, hey, if you're looking at Denver and you're looking at Chicago, go and stay in both for a couple weeks if you can, and do a bake off and see, like, really go in and see, okay, like, what do I love about this, and what I'm like, and meh. Like, tell me
Hmm.
how you're feeling, because your head is not always the best judge of what's happening. Your like visceral reaction sometimes is better. So, I mean, I don't
Hmm.
know like what your research tells you about like techniques that you can use, or is there anything that like you got kind of in your back pocket that could help when somebody's doing that?
For the moving?
Well, yeah, just like like strategies in general to overcome those fears.
Okay. Well, I will specifically to that, what you talked about with moving, I will say there's a tendency in, again, American culture to always want more,
Hmm.
right? More, 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 more. That's how we make so much money, right? That's
Yeah.
also how we spend so much money, which is how other people make so much money.
Yes.
But the happiest I have been is when I moved somewhere and I was overwhelmed by the options and I had a limited budget. I hadn't finished my PhD yet. This is my first like master's level job. And I made a spreadsheet comparing all the things that were important to me. And they
Mm,
were what was important to me,
like values
not what
wise.
other people. And it was
Right.
things like I'd been living in a 17-foot trailer for 2 years. I really wanted a bathtub. I really wanted a bathtub. I was so tired of showering in a closet.
Right.
And the other thing was I really wanted to be in a walkable area.
Oh,
I'd been
yeah.
in Miami for 3 years. I'd spent
Mm,
3 to 4 hours every day on the road, just going 20 miles each way to work. I wanted to just wake up and walk to work.
yeah.
And where that put me was not in the gorgeous one bedrooms that would have with the washer and dryer and everything with the balconies. That would have been out of my budget and farther away. It put me in a 450 square foot studio that was right by the National Mall and 6 blocks from my job. And that is the happiest I've ever been.
Really?
Yes, because I had what was important to me. And
Yeah.
because I knew that when people were like, oh my God, your place is so small,
Hmm.
I was like, yeah, but you had to drive here.
Yeah. Yeah.
You had to park in DC.
Yes. Yes.
You
Which
know,
is not easy. I've
I
been there. It is crazy.
no, the signs contradict each other. Like
Yes.
you had to do that. I walked
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
I don't care if you don't want to come over.
Yeah.
I don't.
I've often said like my dream, because right now I built a house a couple years ago and I live in an area, like the neighborhood itself is great. Like, we've got forest, I'm a mile from the water, like it's a gorgeous neighborhood. I've got great neighbors. I'm very lucky. But I lived in Chicago and New York City and San Francisco, and we walked everywhere. And yet, and
Hmm.
like you, I lived in a shoebox, but I actually loved being able to wake up in the morning. So like when I was in San Francisco, I was in the marina and I was on Beach and Fillmore, which is like an awesome area, like right by like you can see the Golden Gate Bridge when you walk down the street.
Yes,
And
yes.
there was a Pilates studio that I went to, and I would literally run to the Pilates studio. I would take the class and I would walk home. And on my way home, I would get coffee at this like little craft coffee
That's
shop.
the dream.
It was the happiest I've ever been. It was the most money I've ever paid to live somewhere, like including right now where I own a house. But it would like I was just so happy,
Hmm.
and I think that there's something to be said for that value and what makes you um feel at home and in your
Yes.
soul, right? Versus like
Yeah.
what you think you should be doing. So,
Yes. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not thrilled with where I live right now. I think the pandemic screwed things up for me.
yeah.
I did the same thing when I moved to California. What's important to me? I'm close to work. I'm walkable. And then everything shut down.
Yeah.
Literally 4 days after I moved there, everything shut
Oh
down.
my gosh,
And
really?
so in that time, then it was like, I don't have any outdoor space. There's nowhere to go. I feel like I'm in a box. And
Yeah.
so then when I moved back to the DC area, I prioritized like the balcony, the community pool, things like that, because I was like, if things close down, I need
Yeah.
to breathe. Oh, and California caught on fire. So it was like, I
Yeah.
literally need to breathe.
You literally couldn't
Right.
breathe. Yeah.
And so then I ended up buying a 2x2 condo, and now I'm like, and my realtor was, he was a great guy, but he was like, oh, you're not going to want to be in the city. Trust me, when you get older, you're going to want to be blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, I don't need 2 bedrooms.
Yeah.
I don't need 2
I'm in
bedrooms.
the same boat. I have 3
Yeah,
and
I
one never gets touched.
I started renting the other one out because I was like,
Did you?
it's just, I'm paying money for something that I don't really need.
Yeah.
I have a gorgeous patio, but I'm pretty much a 45-minute train ride from everything I want to do,
Oh.
you
Are
know?
you in
And
Maryland
so
or where are you?
I'm in Southern Maryland. So I'm still like
Okay.
on the metro, but
Yeah.
I'm not in DC, right? So I think that I've done a lot of reflecting recently on the priorities shifted because of a global tragedy.
Right.
But now that we're getting on our feet, I feel like I can get back to my priorities.
Yeah.
So I'm probably going to rent the whole place out next year and go back to
Are
a
you?
shoebox. And I'm okay
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But sometimes you don't know that
Yeah.
till you do it. And I think that is something to keep in mind when you make these big moves is, I'm from all my work was on social class during my PhD. So you can guess that I'm not from a lot of money. It was always financial driven. And in hindsight, I see how much money I spent driving, how much money I spent parking, how much money I spent just when I couldn't stand it anymore. So I'd go see my friends and spend too much money because I hadn't been out in so long, and those things do add up. And you think you're like, I'm going to have self-control to not do it. And then if you do have self-control, then you're depressed.
Right.
Like there's no winning. And so that's where the priorities I think are important of you don't need 2 bedrooms. And that's, and I don't want to be an avocado toaster here of like, cause I know everybody's just trying to get like anything,
Right.
but you're not necessarily going to save more money being farther away.
Yeah.
Whoever they is going to get the money one way or another, prioritize what's going to make you happy.
Well, and I think it's worth it sometimes to, like, you're paying also probably for a car payment. Like, I think I heard the average car payment is like $700 or something now.
Yeah.
There's so many expenses that come up with that. And I think when you take a look back, like if you invested that into the place that you were living, which was close to the things, like it would all shake out,
That's exactly what I did.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was like, I don't want to drive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so, gosh, there's so many things that we can talk about here. So, as far as like reflection and growth, like you've obviously reflected, you did kind of a values-based exercise as far as like what you find important. Why do you think people are not doing that more?
I think this also my experience is we can lose touch with our values with how fast paced the world is. When we feel like we're all on a hamster wheel, that we're just so many of us are in survival and we don't realize it. Even if you're doing okay, especially with layoffs, like you could be making 6 figures, but you're like, this could get cut anytime.
Tomorrow. Yeah.
Right. And when I finished my PhD, and I worked full time through my PhD for most of it because again, I had no money.
Yeah.
But that was, I was pulling 16-hour days for years.
Wow.
And when I finished, it was like this voice came out of me, and what it said was, let's go rollerblading.
I just bought rollerblades.
Really? That's so funny. It was so random, but like when I finally sat, it was like,
that's so funny.
I hadn't rollerbladed in 20 years.
Me too. I literally was sitting, I was like, what brought me joy as a kid? And I had these like rollerblades that had like it was like red, yellow, and blue, like the things in the front. I couldn't find them, but I was like, I don't like riding a bike. I have a bike. My brother's tuned it up like 4 times. I miss rollerblading. And so I bought some. It's been raining here, so I haven't been able to use them, but That's so funny that
That's
that's what
so
you thought
I
too.
thought, oh yeah, no, I mean, and you're getting at exactly where I was going to go is, I read a book once by Kim Dynan. I forget, I think it's called Life on Fire, and it's a very short book. And I read it when I was on El Camino de Santiago, which is a pilgrimage across Spain. I've done a couple of them. I did the one across
Yeah.
Spain, the one across Portugal. And I read her book because I saw she'd also been on the Camino. And one of the exercises was, what made you happy as a kid? And the funny thing is, I did the first trail when I was 18, and I had started it, but I didn't finish the book. And that's when, in those 10 years in between my first and second trail, I finished 3 degrees.
Yeah.
And so then I'm finally on this trail, and I was like, wait, do I still have that ebook? Like, I was just at a hostel, and I was like, oh my God, I still have it. And I had taken notes in it, because on the Kindle app, you can take notes.
Yeah.
And what was startling to me was I've experienced so much change in my life. I mean, I openly talk about how I've unlearned a lot of isms. How much I felt like so out of tune with myself as a child, because I'm like, oh, I was wrong about so many things. To
Yeah.
going back and reading those notes, I was like, but what brought me joy has never changed. And so I found that a very helpful exercise of, what do I prioritize when I think about it? I'm like, what did I love as a kid?
Yeah.
And it always takes me back somewhere that I'm like, I mean, even entrepreneurs, even, that I'm an entrepreneur now. As a kid, because we had no money, I was always scraping something together. I was selling this, or I was selling that, or I was
Yeah.
babysitting, and then I learned how to play bluegrass fiddle. And then I was like, I'll play fiddle for you at your event, right?
Yeah.
And like, that was just always who I was. I always wanted to create something. And so I think the exercise of getting in tune with not just your inner child, but know who you really were as a child can be helpful.
So unlearning isms, talk about that a little.
Oh, I talk about that a lot.
Ooh, tell me more.
Talk about that a lot. I think all of that is rooted in fear. I think so. So racism, sexism, classism, we don't call them isms, but homophobia, all of those things, they're rooted in many different fears. That's actually how I came up with the cycle of fear, because I was like, how do I talk to people about this without sounding like a politician? Because I'm not advocating for anybody.
You got enough of those in DC.
Yeah, exactly. That is not what I do here.
Right.
And it really comes down to fear, and that's where I can fear of change, fear of being wrong, fear of being replaced. If you make room for someone else, there's not going to be room for you. And the fear of being shamed of, maybe if you really are open to new ideas, you really are into doing something new, but you're afraid, oh, I saw that person post one wrong thing on Twitter and now they're canceled.
Yeah.
That's going to shut you down right away. That's different than being held accountable.
Yeah.
So I had a really long, some people say it was fast, it felt long. Over years of, I'd grown up in a very small, my town is of 2,000 people at the time, very small, homeschooled, very strict Catholics. I joke, but it's not really a joke. I was raised to be a really good Catholic housewife. I'm none of those things.
Yes.
And I don't have a problem with people who are. I think, if you're able to survive on one income, congratulations in this economy.
Right.
But when I moved to college the first time, I changed majors 4 times. I was exposed to careers I'd never been around. It was a very large school. I went to the University of South Florida, very large international presence as well.
Yeah.
Many different ideas. I was in the honors college. One of the courses I had to take was on Africa. Like, the first thing the instructor from Africa says is, everything you think about Africa is wrong. And I was like, oh boy.
Mic drop. Let's do this.
Wow.
Yeah.
And he could prove it. And it just being exposed. And then I went to graduate school in Miami, which is, I don't think a lot of white people in America get the experience of not being part of the majority. But I think it's a very important experience. It's one I'm very grateful for. And I was in Miami during the 2016 election, during everything that was going on then, and being able to see other people's experiences And while being in an environment where I was expected and allowed to ask questions and learn, and being taught tools on how to collect my own data, and not just get into how many clicks a news article has, it's the gift of my life. I mean, I have a reputation for being very unlucky. My nickname in college was Murphy, from Murphy's Law.
Oh, no.
But that experience is the luckiest I've gotten in my life, for sure, because it's very rare that those stars align like that. And even in terrible circumstances, right? I don't want to be like, oh, I'm so glad that so much pain was on so many people because
Yeah.
I learned something, right? But, you have an option when you see people in pain to learn about it and say, how can I help? Or you have the option to say, well, you shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
And if somebody was bleeding on the side of the street and we were like, well, you just shouldn't have crashed your car,
Yeah.
we'd be like, you're a jerk.
Yeah.
But if we do that with other things that are less physically visible, that's our bias.
Right.
And we do it all the time. So I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. I think that there's a lot to be said too, just for that awareness. I think a lot of times, like you said, collecting data, and a lot of what I talk about on this podcast and with people that I'm having those one-on-one conversations is really like, before you judge yourself, let's take a step back and look at the data. Like, I had Dr. Natalie Luke on the show a while ago, and she does this whole up-leveling women in their careers. She's got a digital course that's on my website, all these things. But with her, she's like, I'm a researcher, and just like yours, she's like, we don't take data for face value. We collect all the data, and then we looked at it as a whole. And a lot of times when you're judging yourself, you're like, oh, go back to the shame. Like, I lost my job. Really? But you got 17 other jobs before this. And, but you're focusing on that one job that you missed. And I think when we do things like, sitting in a city, and like, you collect the data that you love to be in a walkable city, and you ignored that data when you made the move because someone else said you might feel a certain way down the road. I am more like, right now, I've spent a lot of time being present in my body and being present in how I feel right now, and making decisions on right now rather than the investment down the road, which is good and bad. But like, the wallpaper behind me, like, everybody comments on the wallpaper. It brings me joy. I hated this room, and it's my workplace. Like, this is where I like spend the majority of my day. And I remember when I was putting the wallpaper up, I mean, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see it's like honeycombs with little bees, because people call me a busy bee because I move a lot. But like, when I first saw it, I saw it on Etsy, and then I was at the Honeycomb Cafe, like, it was opening downtown Belmont. I live in Charlotte, and I peeked in the window because they were still opening, and they had it on the wall, and I instantly felt joy. Like, I felt like yellow I love yellow. It brings me joy. But I mean, I literally like lit up, and I was like, yes, that's why I want it, And so I literally went right there and ordered it. And of course, it took like 6 weeks to come. I thought it was peel and stick. It's actually the real wallpaper. It's like 8 hours of my life I'm never getting back again. But at the same time, every time I walk in this room, it makes me happy.
And that's much more than 8 hours.
Yeah, exactly. And everybody was like, oh, that might be not a good investment. The new movers, people that move into your house next. I'm like, who says I'm going to sell it? Like, this is me. Like, I love this right now.
Who says I won't take it off this wall and take it to the next place?
Although I will say that they're probably going to have to drywall over it because it is stuck. Like, it is like a gallon per strip, because I was like, how do I make this work? I'd never wallpapered before. Yeah, it was a lot. But yeah, that was like one of those days that was just like so humorous, because I'm 5'2". I took the tallest ladder I had in my garage, and I like called my brother, like, practically in tears. I'm like, I can't reach the ceiling. Can you help? Because he's like, 6 foot.
That's what brothers are good for.
That's what he came over, he helped me. He's amazing. But yeah, I mean, I think that's every single thing you do, you're collecting data, whether you choose to look at the data from a grander scale and like make decisions based on that. You have to do that in order to find like a non-bias in that data, right? And I think that people too often just go in and they don't they don't look at the grander scale. I don't know what I'm trying to say. I feel like I'm probably talking in circles, but I think that fear affects that, right? Like you can look at all the data you want, and if you're afraid of doing what you think, could
Yeah.
empower you, you're not going to do it.
So I have two comments on that. Is one, I'm also trying to learn how to get into my body because I'm stuck in my head, and I'm reading a book right now called The Discomfort Zone, where she talks about thinking with your head, your heart versus your gut, and there is research on that. And I'm definitely disconnected from my heart and my gut. But it sounds like you made that decision with your gut, right? You saw it, you instantly felt the joy,
visceral reaction.
Yes, and I mean, I was raised to be a planner and always in the future, and I'm a saver, and I deprived myself of joy waiting for it to pay off one day. And then when I was 18, one of my best friends got killed in a car accident. I mean, 3 weeks after I moved to college. And so there's this part of me that's like always, we're German Americans. We plan, right? And we're on time and everything.
Yes.
And then there's this part of me that's like, I could not wake up tomorrow.
Yeah.
And we have to balance that. If the wallpaper makes you happy, that is not investing in your 401k. Right? Like the cost benefit, that's an easy analysis. Yes.
Right.
But the thing you said about bias, I don't believe we can be objective. I think we are always biased. I think it's important that we recognize I am biased. And in something like a move, you want to be biased. You want to know what makes you happy and not what other people like. If I was married and had 3 children, I'd be really happy I have more space, right? But as a single woman, I'm like,
it's more to clean.
I was doing this fine on a 17-foot trailer, it's fine. Right. So I think for our personal decisions, we need to be more open to our bias. But then for things, we also have this, and then this is with like the inundation of information we have with the internet and everything. There's also this trend of, well, you can make data say anything.
Oof.
You can make the output say anything. The workings of how it was collected, how it was analyzed, that's not just anybody. And I think I call it the Excel bro, and maybe that's sexist, the Excel bro approach of, how to run a Excel formula so you think you're a data person. That's not necessarily true. And maybe I sound like an elitist PhD saying that, but I'm going to say it because you can run numbers, but what do the numbers tell you? How were they collected? If I administer a survey, I can get the same numbers. But if I ask someone, how do you feel at work? Versus if I ask them, you like working here, right?
Right. A little different.
Those numbers mean something very different.
Right.
So I think we need to recognize the biases we have, and sometimes that requires us to step back. And that's why I think you see a lot of times the leaders hire people like me, third-party people, to come in and do it. Not because I'm not biased, but I'm not going to have the same biases they will have.
Yeah.
And in this case, they need that removed.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, you mentioned a couple times about a 17-foot trailer. What is that all about? Were you like on the road, or tell me more about that?
I wish. No. So this is when I was in grad school. So when I first moved to Miami, I was in this big house with 3 other women, and it was
oh no.
It was the scammiest landlord. Like, we had mold growing in the house. She just painted over it. She would not and we were grad students, so we were poor. We're making 16 grand a year each. We're poor. We are swamped with time, and we don't have time or bandwidth or connections to be like, should we call a lawyer and like pay them with what?
Right.
And so it was awful. I mean, and just one of those roommates in particular was, she would literally leave bags of dog poop in the house. Like, it was the worst living situation I've never had to tell a grown woman dog poop goes in the garbage outside.
Wow.
So I had just really hit my max of dealing with all of that. And my dad had a 17-foot trailer, and I was like, and I saw it as a privilege. I felt spoiled. I was like, can I live in it? And he was like, thrilled, because my dad is Mr. Fix It, blue collar, like,
me too.
this was something like we were going to bond over. And we did. And he pulled it down to Miami and we set it up. And, I learned a lot of handiwork and I learned a lot about leveling.
Okay.
I learned a lot about AC units.
Because you need AC in South Florida for sure.
No, because, especially in a trailer because of what they're made of. Like, if you don't have AC, that's like sitting in a hot car. Like, you literally dehydrate.
Yeah.
And mine stopped working several times. So that
no.
I learned a lot about that because I obviously stayed alive. And so I lived in one trailer park in Homestead, Florida for a while. And then I lived in another one in Hollandale Beach. And that was because I wanted to be a little bit closer to the beach and was a little bit easier of a commute to my school. But I was the only woman living alone there. And I was the only person who wasn't like a child under the age of like 60. Because in South Florida, you get a lot of snowbirds.
Yes.
So it was definitely an experience. And it feels like my whole life is summed up in getting up out of the RV, or it's not RV, it's a trailer, and going to teach a college class or going to take an advanced doctoral statistics class and then coming home and being like, oh, the AC's out. Having to put your shirt on that has all the caulk and the whatever on it and go out and fix the unit, and then you can go do your multivariate statistics and then get back to it. So you see how I got into there's more than two types of people.
Yes.
Because if you saw me at work, I remember I went to cash a check for my deposit at the next trailer park.
Yeah.
Because you have to do that in South Florida because the snowbirds book early. And I had just finished teaching a class. I was in a suit, and bankers, they're like a kiss my ass. I don't know how else to say it. I was like, oh, and where would you like this check to go? And I was ABC Trailer Park, and they were like,
excuse me.
And I was like, yeah,
yes,
that's where it's going. And they were like, okay, and
you're like, this is why I have the fancy suit.
Yeah. Actually, this is my sister's when she was a beauty queen, and it's a hand-me-down. Fortunately, we're about the same size.
That's amazing. Oh my God, I love this. So before we hit record, we were talking about, because I did a focus group. So Anna and I met in a speaker sisters group. I've had a couple of the sisters on the podcast so far, and we've talked about different things, but one of the keynote that I'm preparing is for college students and leveling up when they get out of school. And one of the things that I asked them was, what do you perceive your biggest challenge to be? And one of the guys in the group said fashion. And I was like, what? Like, I'm thinking like, negotiating a contract or, working 40 hours a week when you haven't had to do that before. And he's like, no, the fashion, like, what does business casual actually mean? And you do a lot of culture coaching. So can we speak to that a little bit and some of the things that you've learned from all that?
I agree with him. Yes. So I call it the unwritten rules. And I actually did my dissertation on what are the unwritten rules of work, because I felt like that's why I say I'm a country bumpkin on a PhD.
Yeah.
I felt like I had always done well academically, but I had no idea what I was doing. I mean, even when I finished my bachelor's, I didn't go straight into grad school. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Because we all perceive the cultures that we are in as normal. We don't perceive them as cultural until we're in somebody else's culture.
Yeah.
And when there's just so many levels of once you get into like white collar, upper middle class environments, which are usually also racially white and usually led by men, that it felt like people were talking around issues instead of just saying them, right? And that's and like business casual. Are we doing business or casual?
Right.
Like,
right.
I don't understand what that means. And so I actually did my dissertation where I interviewed people from low-income backgrounds who had experienced social class mobility through employment. And I interviewed Black and white women and men, and I asked them, what are these unwritten rules? All of them said they had it. From white men to Black women, all of them were like, there are unwritten rules.
Ooh.
Now, which ones adhered to them and who experienced consequences
Yeah.
varied. And one of them was learning to speak indirectly, because nobody's going to tell you directly.
Right.
You talk around the problem.
Yep.
Handling people with kid gloves. The corporate jargon, so to speak, of you didn't really tell me anything. And navigating for the women, especially Black women, am I being assertive enough, or now am I aggressive, or how does that
Right.
work?
Right.
So that was like my magnum opus so far,
Yeah.
was talking about that. And I had to interview them because there wasn't a scale that I could administer, because nobody was talking about it. And it makes you feel crazy, because you're
Yeah.
like, how do people just know how to dress up? When I was at Deloitte, we won a big contract and they gave our team a yacht party, which I was
Wow.
like, this is
All
different.
right.
I was in that trailer about 4
Right.
years ago, and I'm going to a yacht party. And they
Right.
said the dress code was yacht rock chic. And I was like, what in God's name is that?
Like Urban Dictionary, what does that mean?
I was like Googling, and it all looked different, and I didn't
Yeah.
even like it. And they said, and my senior manager said, just wear what you wear on a boat. So I showed up dressed as a pirate. And I realized that is white doctor privilege.
Wow,
And
that is
I also
amazing.
knew she had a sense of humor. And I mean, I was within
Yeah.
reason, I didn't have like tight leather pants. I had like black pants, but
Right.
so I kept it within reason. But I was like, you told me to dress like I was going on a boat.
Oh my gosh, that is
And I did. And then I
hysterical.
was like, this is unwritten rules.
Yeah.
Everybody else knew to wear, I guess, stripes. I guess that, like, could you have just said stripes?
Right. Right.
But it's made me more cognizant when I'm leading groups of people, when I'm working on a team, or even when I'm grading papers, sometimes I'm so adjunct faculty. Am I being clear on what I expect?
Mm-hmm.
Am I just expecting that everybody's going to use APA format?
Right.
Or am I just expecting that everybody knows what I think a dashboard looks like?
Yeah.
And a lot of times that's how I encourage more innovation, because I'll say, this is what I want.
Mm-hmm.
And when I really drill down to it, and somebody else will say, but what if we did it like this? And I'm like, ooh, that is
Interesting
better.
perspective. Yeah.
Give it a shot. I want to see it, And that's when I'm working with leaders. That's what I try to drill down to, is as an IO psychologist, we look at their tasks. There are elements of the job, or there's tasks, there's activities, and there's like the elements of the job. And like when you get down granular to it, those can be transferable to many things, or those can be articulated many ways. So how are you talking about exactly what you need, and where can you give some wiggle room to give people some more autonomy? Because that is the biggest predictor of job satisfaction.
Yeah, because that also allows that creative perspective that you might not have as a leader come up with.
Right.
I love that. There's a lot of times too that those unwritten expectations are there, and it could be as simple as like, okay, you said that you want this, but what does that look like to you? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Because to me, that looks like this. Am I on the right track? And sometimes people are afraid, like going back to the fear, to even ask. Right?
I was
Like I
gonna say
should just
that.
know. It's a
Yes.
simple question.
And people and leaders kind of have a hard time. And like, I've been a leader, I feel it. The fear of being wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and the fear of being replaced if what they give you is better. And we've got
Yeah.
to work on that, because you're not really a leader if you're just trying to hold other people back.
Right.
So it definitely taps into those fears. And there is the fear on the other end of, am I even afraid to ask what I don't know? And I think that is a very prevalent fear we have in the workplace, because I feel with the corporate jargon has just gotten really bad. I mean, it's all synergy, impact, da 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 da.
Win-win.
Give me a deck by EOD, and we'll boil the ocean.
Yep.
You just gave me no instructions. And
Right.
that there's also an element of diversity when we don't talk about enough, is accessibility. You can't tell somebody with autism or ADHD, like, you can't tell them a handful of buzzwords and expect a good product. And then that's on you, because you didn't give them clear directions. When you don't give clear directions, you're catering to a crowd who already is in that culture, who already is in your culture. And that's how we end up with very monolithic organizations. And those organizations don't do as well as more diverse organizations. They have the same ideas, they don't have new ones, and they make more mistakes. And we know this from decades of research. If you look at McKinsey reports or the Deloitte reports, we know that from across many organizations in the US. So we have to first recognize that we have cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And then how would we describe that to somebody else? And how do we realize when our culture isn't the only way?
Yeah, people make a lot of assumptions too that neurotypical is the majority when really neurodivergent, I think, is these days.
Right. It's a
So
bunch of different types of neurodivergent, but
right.
yeah. And I mean, people we laud, people in history that they were so brilliant. We're not neurotypical.
Yeah. Right.
And they certainly didn't do things only one way. And they absolutely did not wait for someone else to do it first, because that is not being a leader or a thought leader of saying, well, nobody else is doing that. That is the definition of being a follower, which is fine. Just admit that to yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that our brains are like problem-solving devices and that we can change our mindset just by asking different questions. And sometimes that trips people up, but even just saying like, okay, right now I feel like down in the dumps. I'm tired. I hate my job. I'm burned out. And just sometimes saying like, well, what could I do differently in my job today that will bring me some energize or like re-energize me, right? Like
Yes.
I know for me, like small talk burns me out. But like one-on-one like this, getting deep in a conversation totally charges me. Like I will be on a high the rest of the night because I love this conversation, right? And I might even go rollerblade. But
yes.
but you have to know what puts you in that position, and you have to stop and ask yourself, like, because you're the only one that knows, right? Like what is burning me out? What is making me like dragging me down? And then to be able to go and have the courage to say to your boss or to your peer or something like, I am struggling with this because this is tripping me up, or this makes me like, this is, draining all my energy. What are you doing differently than me that it seems like you're okay with it? Right. And that's part of the culture, that going to somebody and saying like, I don't know, or I'm struggling, or I'm having a hard time, again goes to that cycle that you have, like that fear of replacement. Like, oh, okay, if that person's struggling, maybe there's somebody else that can do it, when really it's hard to replace an employee, and somebody that knows.
And it's expensive.
And it's expensive, right?
Yeah.
So I would almost always rather somebody come to me and say, hey, this is tripping me up. Like, what are other people doing? And then I, as a leader, can go and find out what other people are doing and how they're doing it. And that like can bring it back to you as an employee and have that recharge you versus drain you. Right.
And I think I totally agree. And I also think that many leaders, our idea of one of the things I do in one of my trainings is I walk them through what are the last 100 years of leadership theories. Like, what have we thought a leader is?
Yeah.
And so much of that, we have thought of a leader as someone who knows everything. And it's very catered to be what like the stereotypical, like 50 years ago, white guy was of like a war supposed to be, right?
Right.
And that's had damaging consequences for everyone who doesn't fit that mold, including men who are like, I actually don't want to be a domineering person who knows it all. I actually really like working with people and collaborating on a team. But there's a pressure in leadership, and we reward people for leadership when they have an answer. And I think that's why we've gotten into so much corporate jargon, because people don't say, I don't know. They just say, well, let's boil the ocean. And it's like, honey, the ocean's hot enough. We're a little worried about that. We're a little worried about that right now. So instead of, something we do in research, a research technique is when you're trying to choose between an interview or a focus group. Mm-hmm. An interview is when you want someone just to tell you their story.
Okay.
And that you do for stigmatized things. Like when I interview people about their class background, that was one-on-one, because there's just so much stigma and a lot of trauma that can come with a low-income background.
And shame.
Yes, absolutely. But when I've been in organizations where we were doing maybe a rebrand or trying to get a cultural idea, we did focus groups. And when you do focus groups, you choose that method when you want to see how people interact with each other and you want them to build off each other's ideas. And I think as leaders, we can get stuck in feeling like we're in the interview seat when instead we should be in a focus group.
Yeah.
And because that's how I can see the dynamics. I can see, she gets interrupted every time.
Yep.
Or, notice who didn't show up and has secretly asked me, can I meet with you one-on-one? I don't feel safe being in a focus group.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, but also the good things, the things that are like, I didn't even think about what Phil said, but now that I'm thinking, I think a solution to this could be, and like, leader, it doesn't have to be on you. What if instead of a leader, you were the facilitator? Like, because when I'm in focus group, I'm just facilitating. I'm not telling them. I'm like, okay, you look like you have something on your mind. You want to tell me?
Yeah.
And that's where the big ideas happen. And that's where people want to stay, because we do spend most of our life at work.
Yeah. Well, I think we can attribute that to moving to a new city too. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if you meet somebody one-on-one that lives in a city that is like-minded like you can really pick their brain. Like if you're into art, or you're, in a rollerblading. I mean, I keep going back to rollerblading because now I really want to do it again.
It's fun.
Yeah, but just like having that conversation with someone one-on-one that's like you, that could be in a neighborhood that you would live in, because your real estate agent can't tell you what a good neighborhood is or a bad neighborhood is. They can kind of guide you as to where, people are living, but not, anything specific. But then even having that focus group, like I love telling people to get into a Facebook group that says like, moving to Florida or moving to, whatever state they're looking at, and throwing something out there like, hey, this is what I love. This is where I want to, be. What do I need to know? And getting many different ideas. Cause that's, between the two, like you can collect data and see what other people are saying. I mean, you have to use a little bit of discernment, but going, even if you're doing a POC in this city and going to a karaoke bar and talking to people, because those karaoke people, I'm one of them, are like the friendliest people ever. They'll tell you anything you want to know. But that's a good, basis for meeting people and having that conversation directly, and collecting data, and I think that's the same thing in the workplace. Like you go into these network events, ask questions, talk about it,
So I think the overall thing, because you asked me like how, have you been exposed to these and isms and moving and all these things, workplace. We're having it's like there's a core tenet, but it applies to everything, right?
It does. It does.
And I think it's taking the first step and telling yourself that it's okay. You're not committing to a group. I think that's very important for getting out of the bidirectional thinking. Is I can go rollerblade and I don't have to be a skater.
Right.
Like I can hear this person's story and not say that I'm a crazy conservative or a crazy liberal or a crazy Californian or a crazy Texan or whatever. Right. And I think separating that from your identity is really important. So you can tell a culture by the stories that it tells people, or the stories that are legend in that culture. And a story I grew up with was, if you put a frog in boiling water, it'll jump out. But if you put it in room temperature water and slowly turn up the heat, it'll boil alive. Which, apologies to any vegans listening.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like a foreboding thing of like the slippery slope, right? Of like, be careful what you get into because you don't know. And I think with things like this, with moving and with life and with finding your joy, you need to also consider that the water could be a good thing. That the water could just be boiling and killing your fears or your loneliness or your depression.
Yeah.
And it might be a hot tub. You might have a great time, because something I do when I move to a city is sometimes I use the Meetups app. And I just and I always, right before, I do not want to go, especially post COVID. I have like
totally
unnecessary social anxiety. I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to go. And I just tell myself, even if I walk to the door and peek inside and leave, that's step one. But I've always, when I get there, been like, oh, that doesn't look so bad.
Right.
But even if I did, at least the next time, because sometimes I will leave soon after, the next time I'm already not building this scenario in my head of this seems so scary. I'm like, they were there, it was, a trivia or a dance or whatever, and it was cool, or karaoke, and nobody was mean, and nobody was like Celine Dion good, and it was fine.
Right. I heard something recently that, and I don't remember, I heard it on a podcast. I don't even remember who said it, but they were saying that like when you go to some of these networking events or a birthday party or something like that, and you don't really know many people,
Mm-hmm.
like never talk to the person that's standing by the door. Always talk to the person that's over by the food, because sometimes people get in a room and they like need a little time to warm up. And when they go and grab food or a drink or something, like now they're saying to the room, okay, I'm open to having a conversation. And when I go to these
Mm-hmm.
networking events, because I go to a ton of them, I always say, okay, because I get the same thing. Like, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. Like, it's, and again, like the small talk, you know, drains my battery. But I'll say, okay, I just need to have 2 good conversations and then I can leave. And that never happens. I
Mm-hmm.
always have like
Right.
16 great conversations and I stay until the party closes, right? So I think that it's just
Mm-hmm.
getting yourself into that mindset that like I always, like again, looking at the data, I always do enjoy these things after the fact. It's getting my
Right.
butt to the door that I have the hardest time with. So
Yes. Agreed.
oh my gosh, this has been a great conversation. When we were starting, I was like, okay, 30 to 45 minutes, and we're 58 minutes in.
Oh God.
So, so one, if somebody wants to book you for a keynote, how do they find you? If they want to follow you on social, how do they find you? Like,
So the
tell us all the
hardest thing
things.
is figuring out my last name, Kallschmidt.
Okay.
Okay. So
Yeah.
everything is Dr. Kallschmidt. I'm the only one.
Okay.
So that makes the easy part about having a pain last
Yeah.
name. So it's phone call with a K and Schmidt, Kallschmidt, drkallschmidt.com. You can see what I'm doing, see who I've been working with. You can book me there for initial consults free. And I am just starting to get into TikTok, handle Dr. Kallschmidt, but I'm mostly on LinkedIn. It's just my name, Anna Kallschmidt, PhD, and Instagram, again, Dr. Kallschmidt. So
Awesome.
that is not where my creativity shines, is in handles. And I actually kind of like that my domain is easy to get once you nail down the aggressively German last name. So
Yeah. As in hindsight, like I would have just made it MOTM instead of Mariette's on the Move, because it is so long and people cannot spell my name. So I feel you on that. But Dr. K, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. I will put all of this in the show notes. So definitely go and connect with her. She is amazing. So thank you so much for being here today.
thanks for having me.
Well, I could go on forever and ever about moving you closer to your dreams, but I probably should save some thoughts for the next episode. A big thanks goes out to you for making time for me today. And making time for me, you're making time for future you, and we're both grateful. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe to the podcast, download the episodes, and leave me a 5-star review. I would really appreciate it. In return, if you go to my website, mariette'sonthemove.com, and register for the Monday mailer, I'll send you a free Fred workbook to get your journey started. This is also where you can find all the show notes and all the ways to get in touch with me. A special thanks goes out to Rogue Media for its wisdom and partnership. Until next time, friends, keep moving forward towards your dreams. Oh, and the legal stuff. This podcast is presented solely for educational and entertainment purposes. I am a certified coach, not a licensed therapist, and this is not meant to replace the professional advice of a physician, psychotherapist, or other qualified professionals. This is solely my perspective based on my own experience and training. Okay, now it's over. For reals. Bye for now.
This has been a Rogue Media Network production.